Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yiqing Xu. I'm an assistant professor in the political science department and also an affiliate of Stanford Center on China's economy and institutions. Welcome to our event to launch this great book, Highest Exam, How Gaokao Shapes China by Professor Ruixue Jia, connecting from Hong Kong, and Professor Hongbin Li, as well as Claire Courtenay. So it's my real privilege and personal pleasure to introduce two of my favorite authors today. Ruixue was my colleague at UC San Diego and as a professor in economics. Professor Hongbin Li is a senior fellow at FSI and also my colleague at SKY and its founding co-director. For those who may not know, both Ruixue and Hongbin, their work has helped define the modern field of political economy, which is also my research field. As a fellow researcher, it is both, reading their work is both a joy and also a little bit nerve-wracking every time. So every time they publish something new, I know the field shifts a little bit. I also know that it's really going to be difficult to meet the high standard they set. So it's humbling and sometimes frustrating as a fellow researcher. So this book, however, represents another strand of the research, the one that examines education, aspiration, and inequality in China through the lens of its most defining institution, which is Gaokao. Of course, it also has profound political and economic implications that they talk about in the book. So I should confess I share some commonality with them. I'm also a Gaokao survivor. I often tell my students who complain about midterm, usually a closed book these days in the age of AI, that don't complain. I took a Gaokao exam with 600,000 students in Shanghai during my 12th grade, I guess. And mind you, Shanghai is still considered the least competitive provinces, one of the least competitive provinces in terms of Gaokao. So it's monumental. So this book, The Highest Exam, is remarkable not only because of the evidence and rigor behind it, but also because of its humanity when you read the book. Both Ruixue and Hongbin weave together not only data, history, but also their personal experiences to show how the exam has served both as a ladder and also as a bottleneck for many generations now, and what it means for China's innovation, China's political dynamics, and its economic performance. So please join me in welcoming two scholars I admired so much, whose work has profoundly influenced how we understand China, who continue to inspire me personally, Professor Ruixue Jia and Professor Hongbin Li.
Hello. First, thanks for having me online. And it's an honor and a pleasure to share with you our new book. And this is a joint work with Hongbin and Claire. Let me just this is a book starting with Gaokao, but trying to describe how education in China works and the various implications. Next, please. Given you are at the book talk, I guess there's no need to motivate you that education in China is important and everyone is obsessed with the system. In this age, we naturally want to know whether AI knows about this as well. So we asked the GPT about the main, like the top mealtime conversation topics in China and in the US. It's very interesting. It's not surprising, but interesting to say that even AI knows that in China, the top topic is about children's education and academic performance, whereas in the US, it's more likely about jobs and sports. Next, please. And this is not only about talking about education, right? This obsession is about talking, but it's also about money, resources and energy spent on education. This figure plots a cross-country comparison based on large-scale household surveys across different countries. A rough comparison already point out that China is an outlier in some sense, even in terms of just money spent on children's education. China, the household, the number is about 8%. And this doesn't account for energy, time, and all this emotional involvement in education system. And next, please. And then what's what is China's education system? I think many of you would say, oh, this is a very exam-centric, it's a test-based system. We agree. And the Gaokao is maybe at the peak of this exam. So that's why we pick this as a starting point and as a title of the book. But the book is not only about this system, not only about the Gaokao per se, but to better understand the whole exam system and its implications. Next, please. And as you know, this exam system has a long history in China. It can be dated back to the imperial exam, the Keji system. And if you use that as a time benchmark, it has been already more than 1,400 years, right? So over more than 1,400 years, this system certainly evolved, but it's very interesting to see there's so much parallel between today's college entrance exam, Gaokao, and historical imperial exam. In the book, we talk about their similarity and the underlying logic. So for just give you some example, today, already in Yi Qing's introduction, he already hinted there's regional quota. In Shanghai, the quotas for elite schools are higher. For instance, in my province, Shandong is lower. Many people complained about this, but such a quota system already appeared in the Ming Dynasty. For those who may not know, it's think about that. It's over more than like 500 years, right? And today in the college admission, there this different cutoff, first tier cutoff, second tier cutoff. You can also find similar institutions in the historical exam as a system. So there's, similarity of features, but more importantly is the similarity of logic we try to highlight in the book. So what, the research question or the broad question we are interested in the book is as follows. So as we know, education is important in every society, right? In every society, children from richer families are more likely to go to Stanford than children from poorer family. So what makes China's education system distinctive? Why are Chinese so obsessed with the Gaokao and more broadly various exams as the tool to select merit? How equal or more unequal in China's education system compared with alternative system? How could such exams institution persist for so long? And more relatedly, how should we think about China's education system and its relationship to the broader Chinese society? So these are trying to understand the key features of this system. And once you understand the key feature, there are also implications one can ask, right? Especially in this age of US-China competition, does China's education help or hinder China's global power? And what would happen or already happened, especially in California, where we are, when these exam institutions expand with the immigration of Chinese to the US, what the implication for this population and for the US in general? And also personally, how should we educate or teach our children and students, given that many of us are growing up in this system? So these are the motivations of us to write this book. This is not a typical academic book. I'm not very sure whether the audience know we are economists. Economists don't write books. Most economics don't write books because books are not in our evaluation system. They do not count. So for the relative minority of economics who write books, I think the motivation is to speak to a broader audience. So it's not only to speak to academics and peers, but to to talk to the public and to have more discussion. So this book draws on our own personal experiences. Like many of you, we were educated in China and then abroad. In my case, even in Sweden, and in Hongbin's case in the US, we have taught in different parts of the world and observing different systems. We see ourselves, as a product of the system in some sense. And if you are in this book talk, whether you are attended it online or you are at Stanford, I would say we are relatively successful, examples of the system. But on the other hand, there are many, many others, right, who didn't make it through this system. So this, we needed to think of this together. How should we understand the whole picture of the system? So we are trying to provide a framework accessible to general readers. So in this very, very brief talk, I will show you, and Hongbin will also show you some figures and tables. And in the book, there are no figures and no tables, just very plain, simple English. And obviously Claire, who may not be here today, but she really helped greatly in this round. And we also include dedicated chapters on China's global power, especially how to understand China-US competition from the human capital perspective, and explore the aspects on how China's education influenced the current debate in the US education system, and the immigration to the US, and the high-level cases like the lawsuit against Harvard, etc. Next, please. So this is supposed to be a very brief talk, so I will give you just a little bit appetizer and let Hongbin talk a bit more, but we really want to hear from you, your feedback, and have more discussion with the audience. So I will just briefly touch on the framework we try to describe and to share with you how to understand China's education, which we call centralized hierarchical tournament. And I'll explain these three words, what it means, and let Hongbin talk about the broader implications, including economic competition, immigration, and even maybe for time, we can discuss a little bit about creativity. Next, please. Okay, so now this is a centralized hierarchical tournament. What does this mean? I will start next, please, with hierarchical. And this is easy to understand. If you grew up in China or generally East Asian society, I think we all have a very deep feeling of being at a hierarchical society. Historically, this is relatively straightforward, right? There were four classes: 士农工商, the gentry who pass the exam and get the elite status. They are at the top of the hierarchy. Today, the hierarchy is a bit more complicated and multiple dimension. You can have urban, rural hierarchy. You can have different profession. Maybe being a professor is a good profession. And you have, of course, rich people versus poor people. Even education itself, right, is a hierarchical. The different tiers of universities. I think I just want to share with you one thing of writing this book is now we can get emails from readers, and it's very touching to read of them, how they feel. Some told us they still feel bad about their undergraduate degree, which may not be the first tier or the best universities. They still feel nervous even though they already got a maybe master or PhD degree. And in the book, there's some explanation about the logic of this type of anxiety. Next, please. So on the one hand, yes, today's world, but the hierarchy is more multiple dimensional, right? On the other hand, there's still a very striking feature. So if you ask college graduates, and these are some data Hongbin and his team did when he was at Tsinghua, and they asked for a few years, they asked the fresh college graduates what their most preferred job if they could choose. And you can see, during these 6 years from 2010 to 2015, most people still prefer state sector as their, if possible, their ideal jobs. Obviously, not many people could eventually make it, but if they could, they would still work for the state. So it's striking, right? Over 1,000 years, many things have changed greatly in China. But on the other hand, there's something that is so persistent that this, the state sector, in some sense, the modern gentry sector, is still at the top of the hierarchy. Next, please. And the tournament feature. So tournament, you certainly know it from sports, and it has two features, right? First, it has a relatively simple and clear rules. Second, it has a transparent or objective measurable criteria. In this case, is a test score. For most Chinese, maybe we learned about tournament from exams first rather than from sports. And what are the features of being a tournament? One key feature we emphasize in the book is this is a selection system, even more than education system. So it sounds a bit ironic, but this like Chinese education system is primarily a selection system, and then it's an education system. I'm happy to discuss more about this. But this, this means it has its own its strength and problems. So for instance, in terms of strengths, it select for diligence and intelligence. So people, you are encouraged to work hard, and certainly these are smart people who are selected from the system. Historically, it's men, and today it's men and women, right? And when the society could select diligent and intelligent people to work for the country, certainly it's good it has some good implication for the society. On the other hand, it also has many problems. It put too much in selection. So one example would be in today's version, the selection I would say happened too early, right? When we took the college entrance exam, we were at age 18 or 19, for instance. And then, the school we chose, the major we chose looms large in our life, right? I would say Hongbin and I are lucky. We chose economics as our field at the time of Gaokao, and then we liked it. But for many people who are not so lucky, they have to stick to what they chose at such an early age, right? As you can imagine, there will be potential reform space to improve this system. And this is just one of the examples. Next, please. And then the last and maybe most important feature among these three are all important, but a really very important feature is the centralized system, right? The system from the very beginning, it was designed by the central ruler and the central state as a governance system, right? So over 1,400 years, certainly the system gets improved. So it's now become a very sophisticated and in many aspects cleverly designed system for governance. And so that's the centralized region. And obviously, the Gaokao, it happens at the same time, at the same 3 or 2 days in the whole country in the summer. It's certainly a central, you can take this as annual tournament, right? This is the largest intellectual sports of the country, and everyone is, pays attention to this tournament. And it's the testing subjects, right? It's very carefully monitored and designed, so it's certainly centralized. And the colleges are located by the central government via a quota system, right? And that's, from the state perspective, it's a very effective tool. If the states want certain talents, say AI, it can easily raise the quota for AI majors. And the admission is also centralized. And this feature is not only about the college entrance exam per se, right? Even if you look at the whole administration of from colleges to the K-12 schools, it has this strong centralized institutional background, right? Think about school officials of different levels, they would have different bureaucratic ranks. It's kind of very striking, right? The curricula are also carefully chosen and centralized, right? There are certain, maybe 2 versions of textbooks that could be used rather than very decentralized counterfactual, such as in the United States. And this also has its strengths and potential limitations. And Hongbin maybe talk a bit more in his part of the talk. Next, please. So I will let Hongbin talk more. So he will cover a little bit, given this is the system, this centralized hierarchical tournament, how families and the rulers and society behave in such a system, like an equilibrium, as we economists talk about. Hongbin, could you take over?
So I'll pick up. Ruixue has laid down a really good foundation for the book. So we define the system called centralized hierarchical tournament. Next, we are going to talk about from the perspectives of household, families, the society, and the government, whether the system makes sense, why it's rational from the perspectives of every player. First, starting from families, why do families are so obsessed with the exam and education in China? So the simple reason is that it has a high economic return. So Ruixue and I wrote a couple of papers. This is one of the papers, actually. We estimated the return to education. So economists estimate return to education like this. We compare people in the labor market. So suppose some people have college education, some do not. We can compare their income difference. The difference is called return to college education. So globally, the return to education is about 40% in this country too. In China, it's also about 40%. On top of that, we can also compare graduates from elite colleges to non-elite colleges. So in this case, scholars disagree about return to elite education in this country. Some people found high return, some people found low return, like the famous paper by Alan Krieger. So what Ruixue I did is that we compare Chinese students who took the Gaokao, who scored just 1 point above the cutoff point to enter elite college, and some scored 1 point lower, who are not eligible for elite college. If we believe this 1 point difference is random, then we have basically we call experiment. So this is really rare for economists to have so-called natural experiments. So with this comparison, we found that return to elite college in China is about 40%. So which is really high compared to other countries. Yeah. So the second perspective is the rulers. So from household perspective, it has high return. Actually, I didn't mention that other than this economic return, we estimated. There are other things we couldn't estimate. For example, there could be the returns that cannot be measured by income even. For example, if you enter a good college in Beijing, you may stay there, you get a hukou. So how valuable is hukou? It's extremely valuable. We don't know how valuable it is. At least from Yiqing's case, if you got a Shanghai hukou, you can take a Gaokao in Shanghai. It's easy to get into Fudan, right? Compared to like Ruixue from Shandong, right? So no, Ruixue is the top student from Shanghai. Yeah. So there are many other dimensions that cannot be measured through market income. That's why we tend to believe that even the return to education, the 40% and additional 40% could also be a lower bound of the true return to education in China. So from the ruler's perspective, this thing has existed for over 1,000 years. It must be something good from the government's perspective. So Ruixue is a good historian, so I'm not a historian. I will try to do my job. But so the system provides commoners, ordinary people, a hope to move up in the society. So Ruixue defined the system hierarchical. So how do people move up in the hierarchy? No matter how poor you are, who your parents are, as long as you can pass the exam, you can move up in the ladder, in the hierarchy. So in other words, in China, the gentry in history, the gentry position is not inherited, or not mostly inherited. It's through the so-called meritocratic system. You can pass the test and become a gentry. So this is a very important feature, provides a hope to people in the society, even though the chance of passing the exam is tiny. It's very small, but people still have hope. everyone in the Chinese society, even today, hear about stories about many years ago, someone in my county who passed the test got into Fudan, or got into Beida, got into Peking University. Even though maybe 1 out of maybe 100 million people did it, but people know the story. So once people know the story, people have a dream, I can do it too, so they will try. So the system also is designed in a really clever way. Ruixue just mentioned the quota system. At the time, the emperor found that most the people who pass the exam are from the south. So this is not good for governing the country because people in the north don't like it. So how did the emperor solve the issue? He allocated 40% of the quota to the north, 60% to the south. So that's the initial quota system. Today is more like finally defined. So, so the quota system is part of the system that make it more appealing for people to have a hope. There are other features of this. For example, the system can select talents. So if smart people work for the emperors, it cannot be bad for the emperor to govern the country, right? If other than compared to having not so intelligent people who work for the emperor. And in this process of like taking an exam, so the emperor can also decide what is the content you need to memorize to take. So in the process, they can kind of feed you knowledge they want you to learn. Actually, this is also an important feature of the system. There are other things we wrote in the book. For example, in this country, for example, if my neighbor kids got into Harvard, my kid didn't get into Harvard, what do I think? Most likely, it's not fair. So my kids are better than their kids. The system is not fair. So in China, if my neighbor kids get into Fudan, my kids didn't get into Fudan, what's my reaction? Oh, Yiqing is smart. Yiqing is hardworking. He deserves Fudan. Because everyone knows who is the best tester in the community. So everyone believes this is the best kid. He deserves Fudan. So in a sense, if someone succeeds, become a gentry, get a government job, who do you give the credit to? Normally, they give the credit to the system. If I failed, I'll blame myself. So this is also something that could be beneficial for the emperor or for the ruler. So there are many features of the design that is beneficial from the ruler's perspective. So Ruixue and her colleague Bai Ying wrote a famous paper in Econometrica. So they showed that the late Qing government, because they believe China's the Keju system was so backward, that was the reason for China was invaded by foreign powers. So they should reform it. So they reform it to an extreme that they abolished Keju system. So as a result, one of the reasons for this, for the end of the Qing dynasty is that many of the intellectuals started to revolt, and they overthrew the Qing government in 1911. So this is, Ruixue, did I say that right? This is her famous paper. And also she got a PC, I think, Foreign Affairs, right? Yeah. Okay. Finally, if we look at the society, so one of the things we want to emphasize in the book is that education system or the exam system is only one of the systems that has this centralized hierarchical tournament feature. There are so many centralized hierarchical tournaments in China. So I wrote about political tournament many years ago. Ruixue also contributed to this literature. So I work in both Hong Kong and Beijing and Tsinghua. So you can just feel the hierarchy in every academic department. There's endless hierarchies to climb, actually, until you become like it's called academician, a 院士, or become the president of the university. Otherwise, you're still below someone. So in the hierarchy, you always have a boss, not like this. Once you become tenured professor, like Yiqing just got tenured, You'll become the boss yourself, actually. So this is a totally different system. So just to give you one example, in the US system, every professor, every assistant professor is eligible for tenure. In theory, the whole department can have all tenure professors. In China, there's a quota for tenure. Once there's a quota, it creates competition, creates tournaments. So tournaments is almost everywhere. We also have people from Hong Kong, right? In Hong Kong LC, you know, there's a famous called journalist. In order to get tenure, there's a very clear journalist. They rank all the academic journals into A+, A minus, and give them scores. Once you get enough scores, you are eligible for tenure. So it's a very objective, transparent system. Okay. Education also affects other dimensions of the society. So why China has almost overcapacity in every single industry, you can name it. Exactly because the competition, the tournament. I don't want to get into too much details. Maybe I can answer your questions later. Another question we really try to answer and read about it is this system equal? Economists don't like the term fairness because we believe that's really subjective, although it's important. So we try to be really objective, measure inequality or equality. So that's our method. There are many dimensions inequality in the system. The first one, as we mentioned several times in the talk, is regional quota system. Some provinces, like Yiqing mentioned, have more quotas than others. Like Shandong province, where Ruixue took her Gaokao, is probably one of the hardest province to get into any college. So it has almost a population of 100 million. And the whole province has only like 1 or 2 elite college. So that's making it really hard. The easiest could be Beijing. So Beijing have like several dozen elite colleges. There's also a rural-urban gap because the income gap. My colleague Scott is really expert studying China rural education. I don't want to spend too much time on it. So there's a chapter 2, where Ruixue shared her personal story. So she, if I may, but it's already in the book, she grew up in a really poor village in Shandong province. So it's extremely difficult for her to really pass all the tests to become a professor in the United States. It's almost impossible for anyone, actually. So finally, so even we all face the same test, the time before the test could be spent differently. So how well you are prepared for the test depends on how wealthy you are, where you are born. So everything is important. Income, I'm not saying income is really important. So that's a 3 dimension I mentioned about inequality. What's the outcome? So we published a paper, Ruixue and I also with Ling Shen, who is sitting here. We published a paper studying China's inequality in the access to elite colleges. So we compare high income group to low income group. So here, if you compare the highest income group, which is number 5, and low income group number is 1. So for the low income group, about 1.8% of their kids can get into elite college, which is really low. Highest income, top 20%, 4.5, which is much higher, but still very low, actually. So maybe close to Stanford, Harvard's admission rate, so 4.5. But the ratio, if you can compare the 2 groups, is about relatively about 2.5 to 3, so 3 times. So you can see that there is a high inequality in the system. So how about we compare this to United States here? So this is copied guide from actually the famous economist Ruixue, so from his studies. So we calculate the ratio for the US. The same ratio is 11, which means China's system is unequal. The US system is even more unequal. The reason is very simple. In China, only score matters. Here, in the application, money matters, actually. So for everything, right? For all the extracurricular activities, even your college essays, which high school you go to, which community you grow up from, everything is related to income, actually. So that's why in this system, you are going to see more inequality for sure. So finally, what's the implications for when Chinese come to the US, come to other countries, basically with immigration? And also for when China as a country become a major like economic competitor for the US. We devoted a chapter on global power. Basically, we made a few points. One point we make is that, first of all, for any country, education is important for economic growth. So we have a paper that showed that for China's economic growth, education contributed to about a third of the growth. The other 2/3 is contributed by the better use of resources. We call it economic reforms, or opening up, broadly speaking. Another part of this chapter, we show that education is also important for innovation. When we think about innovation, we always think about the country that produces Steve Jobs or Einstein. Those are very important. But a lot of innovations are day-to-day, really day-to-day jobs in TSMC or in Foxconn, in those factories, actually. So what China did in the past 20 years is dramatically expanded its education system. So when I took the big exam, only maybe 300,000 kids going into college a year out of like 20 or 30 million people. So today, China admits 12 million students a year. So think about the growth. So it went up by several hundred times, actually. Not only that, among the 12 million students, about half are in STEM. So relative to US, only 20 to 30%. There's another number I just found recently. China has around 50 million engineers, 50 million engineers. So there are many definition engineers. This definition is one of the definitions. So out of the 50 million engineers, about 90 to 95% are hardware engineers. So those people are those working for the factories. So doing the screwdrivers or whatever it is. Right to the US has about 5 million engineers, but most are software developers. So those are now software engineers. So you can see the two countries are very different. So in terms of education, what kind of education they receive, what kind of people they produce, this will have long-term implications for the global economic power, especially in manufacturing. Finally, so it's the immigration. We know that China's system is exam-based, is transparent, objective, measurable, comparable. Very simple. Everyone knows this is total score of the test. US current mission, we have a holistic system. There are so many dimensions. Even students don't know, parents don't know. It's not really clear. Maybe there are 20, 30 different dimensions. This is important because one system emphasizes one thing could miss many important dimensions about whole human being, which is really true. But Chinese also believe a transparent, simplistic system. So when Chinese come to this country, many still believe the same system. Then there's some kind of cultural differences. This will create some like debate, sometimes even controversies in the system. As we know that many of the lawsuits in the country, including the federal lawsuits against Harvard, are filed by Asian Americans, including the Chinese. There are lawsuits in local area in Palo Alto, in San Francisco, in many local communities, also about testing, actually. Some believe that our children, for them in Palo Alto, some believe that kids should be placed into different lanes in math. Some believe this will create really stressful environment. We shouldn't have a lane. So there's a delay like movement. So we can see there's some kind of a debate between two groups of people. It's hard to say who is absolutely right. Maybe both are right, both are wrong. So finally, so this is the question Ruixue raised earlier. Does China's education system stifle creativity? This is a very important question, actually, because think about this. We all, before the Gaokao, we only study like a few subjects. We neither have time, no incentive to do anything else. So we just drill for the test every day almost. So will this stifle creativity? It might have. The issue is that nobody has done any solid impact studies that can be persuasive for economists. We are very strict about our standard on evidence-based research. Nobody has shown any evidence on this. This is a hypothesis has been going on in both China and outside China for maybe decades or centuries. We just don't know. But it could also be that there's not enough creativity, not because the education system itself, could be because the whole Chinese society. Because if you think about 2/3 of the students, their first preference for jobs is working for the government, not to become a top scientist or top entrepreneurs. That may hurt the chances of the really talented people to become entrepreneurs. So Ruixue and I decided to study this. Do we have this in the PowerPoint? We don't have it, right?
So it's a summary, a short summary.
Okay, we didn't put the. Okay, so we didn't put the figures up. We just published a paper recently. We showed that. So we got the data of all the exam takers for a few years, and we matched that data to another data set of all the private firms in China. There are around 40 million private firms in China. So we just asked a simple question: if you score high or low, is the higher scoring people or lower scoring people are more likely to become entrepreneurs? So this is a very simple question. And the results are very interesting, of course. I mean, on average, it's the lower scoring students are more likely to become entrepreneurs in China. But we also found that those students who go to an elite college, go to Fudan, Tsinghua, especially Zhejiang University, they are more likely to become entrepreneurs. So going to a good college, it will increase your chance, boost your chance to become entrepreneur. But also interestingly, within the top colleges, within Fudan, within Tsinghua, is the lowest Gaokao scoring students are more likely to become entrepreneurs. Our explanation is that, but we also found that those higher scoring students at Tsinghua or Fudan who did start enterprise are more likely to become successful entrepreneurs. So their firms are more likely to become bigger, get listed, which means it's not that higher scoring students are less talented to become entrepreneurs. It must be because something else. Ruixue, I believe, is the opportunity cost. So because the higher scoring students are more likely to enter the government. So they have a higher chance to become official. So that could be, the job market could be the reason that prevented them from becoming a creative person. So, yeah, so I think this is the book. We spent 2 years writing it. I hope some of you have read it. Some of you may read it later, so I hope you can enjoy it. There are like bookstores selling books outside. Thank you very much. Maybe I can take questions.
So the next agenda next item on the agenda is that Hongbin and I, maybe Ruixue as well, right? Yeah. We'll have a discussion, a fireside discussion, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. I'll resist my temptation of asking too many questions, but it's such a fascinating topic. Okay, got it. All right, so I guess we have about 15 minutes for questions among us, and then we'll open the floor. So my first question is actually, while I was reading your book, the first impression, of course, is that you use your personal experience to illustrate how important education, especially Gaokao, is to your personal growth and development and career. So could you talk a little bit about your background, education, special education background, and why, what motivates you to study economics and write this book?
Okay, so Ruixue, I'll go first. Yeah, so I was born actually, so in the book, I was born in the 70s. So right during, in the middle of Cultural Revolution. So I grew up during the Cultural Revolution. I still were able to see the later part, the revolution. So when I was a little kid, nobody wanted to go to school because we saw those educated people were being crushed in the society. Those are the people people don't like. So all my career goal is to succeed my dad's job, to become a worker in a big SOE, big state-owned enterprise. So it's called like 接班, right? Job succession. So that's my so until in the mid 80s, China really started to change dramatically. So suddenly people started to see the value of education. So I was lucky to catch that tide actually. So and then as maybe in high school, I started to focus on study, and then took the exam. So I took the exam in a very special year. So in 1989. So normally at that time you put your preference of college before the test, before the Gaokao, and then after you know nothing. So and then after the test, you know the score, and then you'll be assigned to one of the colleges according to your preference, according to your score, according to the competition. It's very complicated. So hard to predict actually. So my year, so I filled my preferences, and then it was discarded, and then we need to fill it again because college enrollment cut that year. So anyway, so initially I wanted to do physics actually. So I was a science student in high school, but after the 1989 movement, I couldn't do that anymore. So I decided to do something maybe better for my future. So I chose to do now economics, actually called finance actually. So there's a special class in it's called at that time called Beijing Agricultural University. There's a special class that was supported by the Agricultural Bank of China. Once you enter that class, you are guaranteed a job in Beijing in the Agricultural Bank of China, which is a great opportunity actually. So many of my classmates actually did it because that reason. So that's why I chose economics. I didn't even know what economics was actually at that time. I only know that I could get a job in a big bank in Beijing. So that's the only reason actually. But later, so because I did my undergraduate there, and my senior year I met Stanford researcher called Albert Park. So Albert is at the moment is the professor at Hong Kong University. He's also the chief economist of Asian Development Bank at the moment. So he did a PhD like 5 years before me here in this building actually. So he was doing his fieldwork in China. I was hired by him to be his enumerators, to visit farmers to fill all the questionnaires. It's through that process, he said, "Oh, Hongbin, why don't you come to Stanford to do a PhD?" At that time, I even didn't know what Stanford is. But I only knew there's a place called Harvard, and there's and also a place called Cambridge, not even Stanford. But Stanford became famous only in the past 20 or 30 years. In the late 80s, so because China was shut down from outside for many years. If you don't grow up in an intellectual family, you wouldn't know, right, outside world. So yeah, anyway, so that's the reason I came here actually. It's all random basically. And after coming here, I realized, so I didn't choose economics because I like economics. I also didn't learn much economics actually. I didn't learn math, economics, or English until I came here. Suddenly I found, oh, this is something maybe maybe I can do actually. So that's why I chose it, being an economist.
And you really should buy this book because in chapter 2, Hongbin revealed that Chen, Hongbin's wife, chapter 3, Hongbin's wife mocked his educational background. The first question she raised when they met is, which university did you go to? Ruixue, could you say something about your background and what leads you to study economics and writing this book?
Hi, thanks. As Homi said, actually, I grew up in a rural village. In fact, I still don't know why I was adopted. Perhaps I was like born in 1984, 12 years after Hongbin. And immediately after I was born, I was sent to a rural village to be adopted. So I grew up there. In the book, we wrote a bit about the games we play, although we spend a lot of time study, of course, but we both play games. It's very interesting parallel. Hongbin was, grew up in a state-owned factory in urban China. He played chess, and he was fascinated. I think he could become a great chess player. And I grew up in a rural village. We also play chess, but everyone was so cash constrained. No one is willing to spend any money buying a pair of chess. What we did is we just used like stone branches and so tree branches and stones to make chessboard ourselves, and we played there. I use this just example to say that, well, this concrete example makes me think about rural and urban gap in China. Like, well, even though Hongbin was born in 1970s China, I was born in 1980s China, when China was much more developed. Yet, the chess we played was fake in a rural village, and Hongbin played was real. So if you generalize this would say, the chess gap or the development gap between the two localities is at least 12 years apart. And Hongbin's hometown is not the most developed region in China, and my hometown, despite being poor, is still in Shandong, which is a good coastal province. So it's not the poorest in China, right? So as you can imagine, this says the regional variation from the very poor to the very rich, like Shanghai, very poor, maybe in Ningxia County village, that could be even larger. It's like maybe more than 20 years a development gap, which I found very interesting. Perhaps because of this experience, like after I went to college, again, I also didn't know a lot about economics, and people thought economics in my age at time 19. I attended college at 2000, where economics was promoted as a very popular field. That's again is a theme in the book. Like a lot of our individual paths are kind of affected by the government agenda, right? In my time, education, economics and finance and law were promoted to be the best fields, right? So many people were attracted to these fields, and now you see these things change very quickly. Economics declined a lot, as we discussed in the book. So that's how I went to college, and through the exam system. And at college, I learned about tutoring, not being tutored, but I tutored many students because I was so poor. I needed to earn my living expenses, etc. I think these experiences make me subconsciously, I didn't realize at that time, only later, why I become a political economist, trying to understand the power structure of society, why certain groups are much more powerful and others are almost powerless. And I also see Chinese education as a structure, in some sense, it's a governance structure to distribute power. So everything in China is political economy, and obviously education is a tool to implement many political economy mechanisms, and that's how my broader take of the education system. And Hongbin being both a labor economist and a political economist make this collaborative effort, I think, very valuable to provide a big picture to understand how education works. It's not only about education, it's about the whole society. I think our living experiences, we talk about them not because we are self-centered. We are not very important people that need to write autobiography or something. I think these are just examples, like many of you are examples in this system, and this helps us to see, being a social scientist, it's easier to see that how our individual trajectories are largely shaped by this broader and larger system. At that time, we didn't realize that, right? Why we went abroad, why we study economics, why we even become like a labor economist or a political economist. That this, big picture motivations only, over time would we realize this. When we were young, at least when I was young, I thought I was special, but gradually I realized I was not so special. I was just largely shaped by, this larger society and institutions.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a wonderful answer. I have so many questions, a whole sheet of questions, but I want to organize them by a few keywords. One is efficiency or economic growth. Another topic you mentioned is equality, and also innovation, something that people really care about. Politics, that the exam system is a way that rulers, CCP, organize society and attract the talented people into the system, and also US-China competition. I want to start with economic performance or growth. Obviously, you guys mentioned that education is really important. It's a major economic driver, growth driver. I'm wondering what are the main mechanisms you think Gaokao contributes to economic growth? So one thing that really strikes me is that you said in the book that education is actually the most important industrial policy, right? These days we talk about industrial policy all the time. Even US want to mimic China's industrial policy, but education is something that really allocate talent into different fields. Another thing is that you also mentioned Gaokao seemed to have incentivized families' investment in education, which is kind of unique in Asian societies, right? And of course, the public education system in not only selection, but also human capital accumulation. Could you shed some light on the role of Gaokao or China's education in economic growth?
Definitely. So I'll go first. So when I first came to Stanford, as I said, I didn't learn much in college. But I can still survive graduate school. It's not easy, actually. So the reason I could do it is exactly because I have really good math and physics background in high school. So I can directly pick up from high school to graduate school, just learn the calculus, learn linear algebra, learn probability, and then do the economics, right? I struggled for the first year, but I could handle it. So I didn't learn much. And also I didn't learn economics because there was no economics in the 80s and 90s in China. Economics is called Western economics. Because real economy in China is political economy, basically Karl Marx stuff, right? So economy from US called Western economics. So just started to be taught in college in the late 90s, mid 90s. So what I'm saying is that China's system emphasizes pre-college education. You really work hard. You have a really solid STEM background. You can do many things later. But in colleges, but most colleges not well taught, to be frank, unless you're in the top maybe 30 or 40 colleges. Other colleges, they don't have really great lectures or professors. So one thing about the testing system is that people have really solid background before college. So the second thing I want to say is that, so you mentioned that education is the most important industry policy. Basically, if you have industry, you need people, you need workers. If you don't have engineers, how can you have manufacturers, right? This is impossible, actually. So you either educate your own engineers, or you can immigrate them, right? Bring them in from other countries. You only have two methods. So I think that's why I think human is the most important factor for any economy. This is for sure. Whether our education can produce enough human capital for a specific industry. This is long-term planning, actually. This is something you need to plan because it takes years to educate people. So today's newborns will be workers maybe 20, 25 years from now. You cannot wait 25 years later. It's already too late. So that's why you need some planning actually for this.
So Ruixue, I want to ask you about innovation. I sense that in the book, you guys seem to have a little bit difference in opinion. It's mostly agreement, but some differences.
You know who wrote what?
Well, so actually, in the book, sometimes you say I, Ruixue, sometimes you say I, Hongbin, so I can tell a little bit of that. What I want to ask you about, so you talk about it's more, the Gaokao system more about selection than cultivating or than teaching skills. And you also talk about maybe the education system have not stifled innovation. But you also find that people who have better scores are less likely to start a company. So I wanted you guys to maybe debate among yourselves. So whether you think China's education system represented by Gaokao actually stifles innovation, right? We see so many people working in AI coming from China, scores very high in Gaokao, are they really succeeded in Gaokao, right?
Yeah. So
maybe please.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. And I have been thinking about this a lot. And there's, as you all know, there's many people when they come to this topic, they often have some quotes like, "Oh, China is bad at 0 to 1 and good at 1 to 100." You hear that, oh, in this age of AI, that China's education system will kill creativity, etc. And it has been there for many, many years. My take on this is I found that this discussion is not useful. It's too broad and too vague. How to define creativity, right? It's like there's certain problems of the test system. This is like if you're a doctor, you just tell your patients that, oh, you are sick. You don't tell them, well, why. So I don't find this useful. I find it's more useful to be more concrete or specific about what kind of skill being killed or stifled by the Chinese education system. Some of this may be related to creativity, some maybe not. I think there are two types of skills that are stifled by the system. One would be social skills, like the communication skills, right? Even today, I wish I could have better communication skills than you, to give you a, not than you, than myself, to give you a better presentation. And this was not really encouraged or fostered in Chinese education system. And in this, communication skills have been always important for the labor market. But in this age of AI and automation, I imagine the value of, communication and broadly social skills can be even more valuable. And in this aspect, obviously, U.S. education did much, much better, right? So that's one type of skills. I wouldn't equalize that to creativity. Many people would say, "Oh, look, American students ask more questions in class. They must be more creative," which I have some reservation, perhaps because I studied in Sweden. Swedish people are also very quiet, and no one can say that they are stigmatized. That say, oh, Swedes are not creative. So I think there's some stigmatization in this type of generalization and using very vague words like critical thinking and creativity. So that's one type of skills. Another type of skills that may be more directly related to innovation, which is some people call it critical thinking, but I would say it's more like the courage to challenge authority. Right. And this was discouraged in Chinese education, not only in Chinese education, but broadly in Chinese society, right? You are not encouraged to challenge your leader, whether you are in a company, whether you work in a university, not to mention if you are working in the government, right? And obviously, challenging authority is kind of closely related to innovation and leadership. And so, if you don't do this naturally, you are, this could have some cost on innovation on the so-called 0 to 1, which I still a bit skeptical what is 0 to 1, even though people talk about that as if there's something easily to to be mapped to. So, and again, I would say this reflected the broad message you want to deliver in the book is education system reflects the society. It certainly affects the society, but it also mirrors the society, right? This striking or cost side that not encouraging young to challenge the old, the junior to challenge the senior, average people to challenge the authority is not only about the education. Even if you change the education, like say if you have Einstein, if Einstein graduated and had done work in the government or work in the Chinese university, he has to listen to the dean, right? And or listen to the leader. So it's equal. I would think this is a very important incentive problem. What economists call is the whole structure not incentivize you to do creative destruction in some sense. In this using Nobel Prize phrase this year, it encourages you to spend effort to climb the hierarchy. There's hierarchy within the hierarchy. You naturally would spend more your effort and your time and energy on this kind of effort, on this kind of activity that is more rewarded by the system, right? So I don't see the reason I hesitate to follow the many people's argument about creativity. I found it's often lead to stigmatization rather than any solution of the problem. And it's not, I also think it's not that people selected through this exam system are not creative. It's more they don't have incentives to spend their energy, intelligence on the activity that is creative. So if you want to reform from this aspect, I think only reforming education or us is not enough. It's more like you need a collective effort of the whole society. But ultimately, it's become a political economy question. Is it good for rulers or the power class to have such a alternative system? And that's my take on this very controversial issue, I would say.
I don't disagree with Ruixue.
Okay, that's great. That's
But
great.
I just want to add that even when you think about like being authorities, the Japanese is even more than Chinese actually, but they have won so many Nobel Prizes in the past 20 years. So some people ask me why not Chinese getting Nobel Prize. I said, so normally Nobel Prize is the contribution you did 3 years ago, right? I told people 3 years ago, I was still trying to get food actually. We were hungry, we couldn't eat enough. How can we think about scientific innovation, right? It's just watch, maybe in the next half a century, it may change actually. So even Chinese, I predict will get some Nobel Prize, especially in science, not in economics, but in science, be soon actually. Economics is totally different actually. Another thing is that because economics, you have to study U.S. economy. So basically, another thing I will give you is that innovation, right? For Ruixue is basically talk about it's not only the education system, it's the labor market that reward not becoming an entrepreneur actually. Even so, China still has really high entrepreneurship. So among college graduates, 7% become entrepreneurs, which is really high. China has 40 million private firms. So the highest actually entrepreneurship college among all the elite colleges is Zhejiang University. 16% of Zhejiang University graduates become entrepreneurs actually, which is also very high. So it's not low actually.
Hongbin, in the book, you talk about you were tasked to reform Gaokao.
Yeah.
And later this reform was put on hold. And in recent years, there were policies, anti-involution, 反内卷 policies, including banning the tutor sector, and which people may be interpreted as prioritizing equality and common prosperity, however we define it. Do you think this kind of reform is going to be successful?
It's very difficult actually. So actually, when I was at Tsinghua, so I got a chance to, because they know I study education, so I was giving advices to some research like studies on reform education. So one thing we did is that we had like so-called independent admission, 自主招生, right? So basically, the top colleges, Peking University, Tsinghua, Fudan, they can admit their own students without going through the Gaokao, the exam. So how did Tsinghua do it? We wrote a harder exam, Tsinghua exam. And then we also experimented letting them writing essays. So I was actually really being tasked to read those essays. So like, what's the, for the one I still remember one topic is write about the most risky thing you have done in your life. So most essays, the most risky thing they have done is basically taking a bus from one place to another place in the city. Because they have never left home actually before. So they only go from home to school to home, actually. So we just realized that reading those essays are useless. In the end, we just still rely on the harder test we gave them to admit students. So it's the same thing. Also, I mean, that also people may blame it, have some kind of subjectivity and corruption. So people don't like it. So that's one reform we tried. Another is we try to, okay, can we just let students take tests multiple times rather than one Gaokao? We created something called Chinese AP exam, copying American AP exam, right? So, so if students can take the AP multiple times in high school, as long as they pass, they don't have to take it just in one shot, right? You know, China's Gaokao, we have 3 days, 7 subjects, really intense. So like 6-hour test a day. So I actually found a friend. So the two of us wrote a textbook, only printed 10 copies basically in the end. So we wrote a textbook on China's AP economics book. So I didn't want to copy American books. Although I learned economics here, it's also principle the same. We use a lot of Chinese examples to illustrate how economics works, actually. But we wrote a book, and then the reform was abandoned because every summer we train all the high school teachers to teach high schoolers economics. We realized that all the high school teachers are from the top elite high schools in China. There's no single rural school teacher. So you have this test. What will happen to the rural kids? They have no hope in basically. So that's why this is very controversial actually. In the end, so they abolished the whole system because this system only, you have AP, you have options that's tailored to more wealthy families actually. So that's why we didn't do it. So recently, you know, China started so-called anti-competition, anti-evolution like movement, right? I think the spirit is right, but it's very difficult to do because people see the high return of education, and you still have the testing there. Then people have incentive to do well in the test. The only way to resolve it is because the test is to place people in a hierarchy. Ultimately, as long as you have a hierarchy, people would care. You need to figure out a way to place people in different places in the hierarchy. I think the best solution is to flatten the hierarchy. So that's not easy to do, actually, flattening hierarchy. For example, can we abolish like Shanghai Hukou?
I would
let everyone
that.
to take the test in Shanghai, right? So that's very difficult to do, right? You agree because you are here, but most of your family members there don't like it, right? So that makes it in the end become really political, I think.
Okay, maybe my last question, and then open up the floor. Ruixue, I'll ask you another question, which is what U.S. can learn from China after studying the institution Gaokao. You've already said that the education system mirrors the society, right? And you said that the Gaokao is a hierarchical system. And what actually can we learn from, can U.S. learn from China's education system, especially Gaokao?
I wouldn't, of course, promote Gaokao in the US context. I think there are 2 aspects I can share. One is, I think both US and China face the same challenge that both systems are too hierarchical, especially the college education. And as we said in Hongbin's talk, the US hierarchy is even more difficult for the commoners to reach. I think this is really kind of reflected by the the recent years on this lack of trust in all these elite universities and the current policy attacking elite universities. You can all blame this on Trump, but I still think Trump is a reflection of the problem of the society. And it's a kind of ironic because on the one hand, both countries seem to be enemies. On the other hand, they are soulmates in these aspects. In the social survey, both Americans and the Chinese think that attribute their success to individual effort. And Chinese is even to the more extreme. I think this contrast with like alternative system like Europe. Now, of course, Europe is also in crisis, but so we really need new ideas to think about how to break this hierarchy, how to make education a bit more flattened, a bit more, or more according to the need of the labor market. Currently, in both society face the problem of that too homogeneous, right? There's a hierarchy, being at Stanford is good, being at UCSD is also good, but we feel we are teaching the same thing, basically. It's just with the fewer resources at UCSD than Stanford. Similarly, the California State University become another one adding into the hierarchy, right? So it's not very healthy in either case. I think the two society in principle could learn from the problems of each of them faced. Then, of course, the advantage, I think, from the Chinese side is this, how would I put it, is like this value of learning. I was always kind of struck or moved, like when we give book talks at 10 p.m. In China time, there's still like 500 people in the video. I think this is, I don't know what US can necessarily learn, but I think this is the strength of the Chinese society. This people value a lot about learning, whether this is just purely from material benefits, that's fine. I think that's useful for the societal development. And I hope this would keep China, this would be kept even there despite all this discussion about lying down or evolution. So that said, I don't think the US, obviously we see the mistakes or problems, the current education policy in the US, right? This universities, especially scientist policy, is difficult for any sensible person, not only economics, but also any sensible person to believe is good for US development.
Do you want to comment on this question?
I think let's take questions.
Okay. Now we open the floor. Could you stand up so that our camera can capture you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Hi. My question is to Professor Li. I have two kids, right? I have been through the Chinese test system. When I was little, my mom's always say, if you don't study hard, you can't get into a good college. But for my kids, I always have a hard time how to motivate them, right? Since if you work hard, you don't guarantee to get into Stanford. So, what's your advice? How do you motivate your kid?
So unfortunately, one of my kids are already at Stanford. So I think there's a new literature which is really interesting to me. So, but in the future, I think going to college or not may not be as important as in the past because of AI. I think what you learn in college, you can learn from AI. Even at Stanford, you can learn much faster from AI than Stanford professor like Ruixue and me, actually. So, but one thing I think is important is that going through the exercise of working hard, building a habit of working hard is important. I think this new literature, as I found it, not in the book, it's called cognitive endurance. We all know physical endurance. We can just like do lifting, right? How much you can do. This is called muscle training. There's also called mental training. So they give a test to students, a 3-hour test. The level of the test is the same throughout the 3 hours test. People do better in the first 30 minutes compared to the last 30 minutes. So the gap of the score between the first 30 minutes to last 30 minutes is called cognitive endurance. So they link this data, economy link this data to labor market data. They found that people who have higher endurance at a young age make more money at their 40, when they're 40 years old. So basically, can you sit in the office writing code for 10 hours straight? This is called mental endurance, right? Cognitive endurance. A lot of people cannot do it, right? So can you work in a factory doing the same repetitive job for 10 hours a day? Most people cannot do it. So that means if you want to have software engineers, you need to train them at a younger age. You want to have manufacturing workers, you also need to train them at a younger age. I'm not talking about the top 1 out of a million people, Einstein or Steve Jobs. I'm talking about the medium worker in a country, which is important for the economy and for innovation and for competition, actually. Can we train workers like that? I think that's very important. So back to your question, so how to motivate them? Maybe it's not going to college. They have to do it. So in China, they don't have a choice. Here, kids have choices. So that's the hard thing for parents. You need to motivate them. But if you give kids 2 choices, one is playing video games, the other is work hard, 3 or 4 math for 3 hours. Most kids will choose to play video games. As parents, you have to deal with that, right? So of course, we cannot pick up kids here, but we can still give them an incentive to work hard, actually, I think.
Thank you so much, professors, for sharing. I have a question for the inequality part. And I think in the presentation, you guys mentioned a lot about the factors lead to the inequality, such as the family income and also the quota system. And I'm also a Chinese student. During my journey of growing up, my parents, the society, and also the teachers always told me that although Gaokao is imperfect, but it's the best option that we have. So I have got these questions that, do you think Gaokao is the best option for China in terms of equality and also give us the best chances to break the hierarchy? If not, what other options do we have?
Ruixue, you want to answer the question?
Yes, sure. Let me take this way. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the best institution, but it's a useful institution. That said, over time, there are a lot of changes in equality. You know, when Hongbin and I took the exam, I think it still served as a ladder of success in some sense, right? Because at that time, families are poor, or very poor, relatively speaking. They didn't have many resources to invest in their children. Now, you know, the reason that tutoring became a necessary almost part of your education, and the family investment also become a larger and a larger part of your education, and that's naturally lead to, you know, more inequality, and people talk about class classification or something, class calcification. It's difficult to change the class, which is true. Actually, we also find similar patterns in the data supporting this pessimism. So what I would suggest is not to abolish the exam and turn to another institution, but to reinvent the exam system, in some sense to reform the education system. For instance, the reason that family investment played so much larger role in your own education is because the rule of the school education become less important, right? And that's partly related to the inequality in the distribution of supply or the resource. The school quality is heavily unequal across China. And this is not this can be changed if the government wants to do so, because China, after all, is a centralized system, is a public education system. I understand that this could be very unequal if you purely rely on market, right? Richer neighborhoods would have richer schools. But China is not a private system, it's a public system, but still it's so unequal. And this can be changed to improve the accessibility of good education resources and ultimately good college access. So I see a lot of reform that can be done if the government has incentives to do so. And it's relatively feasible, I think, in the Chinese system than the American system, for instance. And related to your point, the more broadly why Chinese like the test system. It's not that Chinese people are naive, right? That think that, oh, test would reflect my talent, right? It's, as you said, it's more like a constrained choice, is that, oh, without such an objective measure, we know that power would influence everywhere, influence the opportunity a lot, right? Even in the current system, right? You read the news about this 协和, the union medical school. There's still people wants to game the system. So as you can imagine, if without such objective testing system, the power influence would be even more prevalent, and that meant people favor the test system. That said, that's okay, but it doesn't mean that you just keep the current system without reforming it, because over time, this is an old system, right? In the 80s, 90s, it could work well because people haven't got resources to invest in them by themselves. And now it's become actually a bottleneck and a burden. So then there's time to reform rather than just to keep the old system. Does that make sense?
Thank you. So I really enjoyed this book, and I am very interested in the family investment you talked about in the book. And also, I think you shared the point in the presentation that Chinese invest like a lot in education, right? So I would like to ask if you think that this is kind of like waste for these household or in general for Chinese society. And also what's more surprising is that I think in the book you mentioned that poor people even invest more proportional than like rich people. But development economists are like worried about poor people invest less than poor rich people, right? So what's your take on that? Thank you.
So once basically when poor people invest more as a proportion, that means this thing become a necessity good. That means you have to have it. That's why you have to consume it, right? Even you're poor, then the proportion as a proportion of your income become higher, right? So which means people believe education is necessary in China. Even no matter how poor you are, even you go to a really poor rural village in China today, they still hope their kids will go to college. Later, they may not go to college, but they still hope. But even today, I mean, we know China has high inequality, but even in rural area in China, today, about 50% of kids go to college today, which is unimaginable like 30 years ago, right? Even go to back to your question, right? Go to really poor rural village. We brought our Stanford student there last year. They have beautiful schools. So their issues now, they don't have infrastructure. The problem is that they don't have good teachers. They try to hire good teachers, the teachers don't want to go there. So I think more fundamentally is not about education equality. In the end, it's about hukou. So I think it's still hukou. If allow kids to go to school anywhere, this will solve the issue. Then how to do that? I think that's something I think the government really need to think about this. I think most central policy in China is now even the education policy is the hukou policy, land policy. If you can resolve these two, all other things will be resolved, I think. But that will take some time, I think. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. One is, if the government decides quotas for different fields, the government says so many students can take STEM courses or something else. What is the impact on people's efficiency or happiness if they're taking jobs or studying fields that are not their talent, that inherent talent? If they're focusing on, if you're studying whatever, biology instead of economics, because the government gives you a position in biology, how happy are you afterwards? Are there any measures of the allocation of talent in China? Are the people happier? Are they more efficient or less happy, less efficient than in a system where people choose the courses that they want to choose rather than looking at a quota that's available? That's one question. The other one is if the education system is so entrenched that the hierarchy, the ranking, the quota system, and it's the meritocratic system, is that linked to the political system? Could you actually have a different political system with this education system, or do the two kind of go hand in hand? You're accepting the hierarchy, the meritocracy, the system itself. So the Gaokao is actually at the core of the political system as a question.
Ruixue, do you want to take the questions?
Yes, I can take the second question first. It's easy. That the answer is no, you can break them. It's already been broken in South Korea and Taiwan, for instance. So it's not that, it's true that there's, if you are a ruler, you might like the current exam system, right? There's a logic there, but it's easy to, it's not that you cannot break the link of these two. So that's the short answer. The first question, yes, it's like what economists called mislocation of talent. And certainly there's a lot of mislocation talent in this selection system because, as Hongbin said in his and my example, that we chose economics without knowing that. And this system has a lot, once you chose it, there's a lot of friction of making changes. You are also very busy, and there's also not good institution to facilitate you to switch majors. So naturally, yes, I see even among, this is maybe you can see this if you teach Chinese PhD classes, there are many economics PhD who may not necessarily like economics or political scientists who entered that field by chance, and they have to stick to that for a long time, and that's pretty painful. Even though economists don't have good measure to tell you, but you can see that from day-to-day teaching experience, you wish, wow, this could be a novelist, but he or she unfortunately become economist because maybe when he took the exam, his parents said, oh, it's a good, you can find a good job if you do economics. So yes, and again, I think related to someone asked about whether there are, some meaningful reforms. I think there are. I think over the past 20 years, I see a bit more improvement in this dimension, including allowing for more choices at the college admission. At my time, I imagine even more so in Hongbin's time, we only could choose 3 choice options in our college admission. Now with the computer power increased, you can choose many, like sometimes some provinces 20, some maybe even more than 20 options. So the more options you have, and after that, if you have more options to switch your major to find what you like, etc., would help. I think again, I in some sense I'm optimistic because I see there's so much scope for reform and improving this system. And many of these doesn't seem too costly. Some are very, very difficult, like flattening the hierarchy, which is the key, but very difficult to do because it's contradicts the current government aim to compete with the US in terms of leading universities. So they really want to put all the resources to the few leading universities so that they can compete with the US. So there is a very innate trade-off in those very big, important reform directions. But at the relatively local direction, like can we improve the mechanism of college admission? Can we allow like more freedom in major choice, more freedom to switch, etc.? I think this could be improved relatively easily.
All right, due to time limits, let's thank Professor Hongbin and Professor Ruixue again for this wonderful book. And thank you for coming to this event.